Hi guys, welcome back to Nyx Reads. I hope you guys had beautiful holidays if you celebrate Christmas, and if not, just a good start to a winter break. This is my very late November reading wrap up, but I wanted to make sure to get this video up because I read 12 books in total. 67% of those books were non-fiction, which is I think a first for me within a month, because it was Nonfiction November, a reading challenge that is hosted by the wonderful Book Olive, where you participate by reading at least one non-fiction book in the month of November. Some people like to switch it up completely to non-fiction during that time, but I just increased my ratio. I went through the TBR that I had put together prior. Let's talk about all of my non-fiction reads plus any other book that I had picked up in November. Starting with Committed by Elizabeth Gilbert. I had picked this up because I already read Eat, Pray, Love ages and ages ago, and I remember really enjoying it, and I've watched the movie countless times. It's kind of like a feel-good movie that I always come back to. And then I saw this book in a nice hardcover edition at the library sale that I went to, and I think it was April. Had it not been for Nonfiction November, this book would have probably stayed on my shelf for the longest time, but this way I prioritized it, and I am so glad I did. This very much surprised me. For the first time in my life, I added little tabs for sections that I wanted to go back to. Honestly, I think I picked this up at the exact right time in my life for it to enjoy it so much, because as you can see from the tagline, it literally says a skeptic makes peace with marriage. While I personally don't necessarily identify with being a skeptic, I'm at an age where a bunch of people around me are now starting to get hitched, and it becomes something a bit more tangible for me personally in the future. And as an avid overthinker, I've started to ponder the thought of what marriage means and what that commitment means for a person's, for an individual's, especially a woman's life. So this is a memoir that takes place after the events of Eat, Pray, Love. If you haven't read that book, just to summarize it, I mean, it's not really a spoiler because it is a memoir. In Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert goes on this, I think, year-long self-discovery journey where she first travels to Italy, which honestly was my favorite part because of all the food. Somewhere in India where I've forgotten the name of the city, and then to Bali. In Bali, she meets Felipe, a Brazilian-Australian man whom she falls in love with, and this is the story of them being forced to get married because of US visa issues. Both of them know that it has to happen in order for them to stay together and live together in the US, where they want to build their life together. Both of these people have been previously divorced and are pretty much scarred from that experience and vow to themselves that they're just never going to get married, but now they're where they are, and it is something that they have to do to stay together. So they're in this limbo where they cannot go back to the US together yet because they have to wait for all the paperwork. So they go back to Asia and stay in multiple places. And the book is divided in different interesting chapters where she really goes into what marriage means with two different aspects of her life. So one of the chapters is marriage and expectations. Another one is marriage and women. And she goes a bit into the history of marriage as well. But she herself says in the beginning of this book that this is obviously not a historical piece, but I really enjoyed this. I really did like how critical she was about all the aspects that she mentions in this book, and how she's trying to relate the story and the history of a commitment back to her family history, for example, and where she personally stands in life. It is extremely self-aware. She is not afraid of calling herself out on what she thinks she is lacking maybe in some department or the other, or even her partner. This is quite the slow read, but I was never bored. I always wanted to see where her thoughts lead her next. I very much enjoyed the prose in this one. I like her writing style. And what's very interesting is, since this book was published, she indeed got a divorce from Felipe, and I think she married her female best friend, who since then unfortunately has passed. So you'd think, okay, I mean, this story is essentially a love story, right, between her and Felipe, but that's where you're wrong. I mean, read the tagline. It is not an easy breezy love story where, you know, only the rosy sides of a relationship and of marriage get presented, which means that she never comes off as smug or know-it-all in this book. She shares her honest fears and what-if scenarios with us, which in turn means that even though her life has changed drastically since writing this book, none of what is in here is invalid. It stands very much still well on its own. I want to read you one of the sentences in this book to give you a feel of how the writing feels like. Well, I have been thinking very hard about all this. The leap in marriage has not come easily for me, but perhaps it shouldn't be easy. Perhaps it's fitting that I needed to be persuaded into marriage, even vigorously persuaded, especially because I am a woman and because matrimony has not always treated women kindly. There you go. That is, I think, a very accurate depiction of the tone of the book. So don't go into this expecting a rosy depiction of marriage and relationship, because that really is not. Read the tagline. Then I read Beyond the Gender Binary by poet Alok Vaid-Menon. This is a great introduction to understanding non-binary identities and looking beyond just seeing black and white. This is a powerful little book that packs a lot of information for you, but also the author shares a lot of personal experiences. For example, what it means for their life to be non-gender conforming in how they dress, for example. This is honestly a great start, a great book for anybody who has more questions about this topic and doesn't really know where to start in literature. What's really cool is the Q&A or FAQ section towards the back of the book. Next up, I read Julie and Julia after absolutely loving My Life in France, as everybody who watches this channel knows. And also, I have watched this movie a few times now. This is a memoir based on the project that Julie Powell started, where within a year she wanted to cook all 524 recipes from Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and she put all of those experiences in a blog, and since then she wrote this memoir. So obviously this is about French cooking, but it's also about her marriage and of her uncertainties of being a woman in her 20s. This is one of the first nonfiction books where I really encountered the problem of, I don't know how to rate this because this is extremely personal. I think I settled on a 4 out of 5 stars. I looked at some Goodreads reviews. This is at I think an average of 3.6, and I saw quite a few negative reviews about people saying that she overuses the F word a lot. They don't, you know, like her writing style irks people, and some people seem to be really put off about the messes in her kitchen and life. But that got me thinking. This book was published in 2005, so it's been a while, and a lot of the reviews that I saw, that they were written around like 2014ish, and I think that also stems still from a time where especially female writers, I think, have to conform to a quite ladylike voice, whereas I think now authors are more encouraged to just, you know, have their own voice and, you know, don't censor themselves. But again, I'm digressing here, sorry. But in a nutshell, I liked this a lot, more than I thought. I was scared because of the reviews that I read before. I just really appreciate how honest she was, honest about her life, her husband, her marriage, and, you know, anything that she was contemplating during that time, because, you know, she wasn't really sure what to do at that point with herself besides taking on that big cooking project, which kind of stems from the uncertainty that she had. It was indeed a crazy year for her, right, where she cooked an enormous amount of recipes within that year with a shit ton of butter, which cannot be easy for the mind or the body. I like that she didn't hold back. She took us into the mess of her life and the literal mess in her kitchen. I think it was all in all just a very entertaining read. I should give a trigger warning though for anybody who is maybe vegetarian or vegan, because there's some quite literal descriptions of, let's say, breaking up bones to get to the bone marrow. What was missing for me personally, and if I can believe the movie, then I think this is one of the criticisms that Julia Child herself had on, I think it was the blog, not the memoir. I wish there was more about the actual cooking experience in here. I wish there were more descriptions of the process of cooking, because that's something I'm very interested in, like the techniques that she used, you know, what kind of ingredients she used and the mistakes that she made in the kitchen. Just more descriptions of the actual cooking and the food. Unfortunately, the author Julie Powell actually passed. I think when I was 2-3 days reading into this book, she mentions bunch of times in this book that one of her favorite cocktails is the vodka gimlets. I'm gonna be raising a vodka gimlet to the author. Next, I read Ask Me About My Uterus by Abby Norman. This was a tough read on the author's pain and her seeking for help, because for the longest time, nobody believed her pain. It was years of not getting proper help until she was finally diagnosed with endometriosis, which essentially also happened upon her own research and her self-advocating. It starts, for example, with her as a younger girl losing motion in her legs and just kind of being dismissed about it. And then one day while she's in university, she just completely breaks down from abdominal pain, excruciating pain that lasts for a while. She's giving us a full picture of her diagnosis and her life up until now with endometriosis, on how she was dismissed because people were just essentially saying, you're making up the pain, you know, it's a mental health thing, that it's not real, and how her sexuality is being completely dismissed as well, how that affected her upbringing, her life, and then also her relationships. This book is gonna make you angry. It is really, really not an easy read, but it is very informative. What I appreciated is that she gave a very comprehensive context about her background and her relation to pain and to doctors, because I think that was an important information as you move forward in her story. I think it's very, very well written, even though it's not easy to digest. You read this and you just kind of want to like shake all of her doctors and like any adult who didn't help her or who didn't believe her. But if I learned anything from this book is that, for example, endometriosis or any other conditions that affect primarily or exclusively women are a lot of times extremely underfunded and hence very under-researched. And especially when it comes to health issues for women, that sometimes you just really, really, really need to advocate for yourself. Medical gaslighting is a thing and it's incredibly upsetting, but nevertheless a great read, and even though the topic is hard-hitting, an empowering read. Then I read or listened to Gathering Moss by Dr. Walkimmer, who teaches environmental and forest biology. I don't know anything about moss. I've never looked at moss closely, but I picked this up on a whim because it looked interesting to me, and I don't think I've read some kind of nonfiction so nature focused before, but I enjoyed this one so much. This felt like a warm nature hug. The language is just so tangibly full of love and respect for life and nature. It's a very holistic approach looking on how mosses live and thrive, and then relating all of this back to the human experience. The author is in fact Potawatomi, and she weaves a lot of her native culture and experiences back into this book. My favorite chapter in this whole book is called The Owner. If you've read or listened to this book, you will probably recognize it. It was about this incredibly wealthy, I think even a celebrity man, who hires her as a moss consultant for this ostentatious, what was it, like just landscape project. And I just thought the message in that story was very good. While I don't necessarily remember every single moss fact that I learned from this book, but I do want to say I have a better understanding of mosses in general now. I really want to pick up Braiding Sweetgrass. That was one of the other books that the author is really well known for, and I think it was Jessica from Lady Lovestead Reads. She said that this book is really amazing too, so I will pick up Robin Walkimmer again. Then I also listened to Dear Girls by Ali Wong. She's an Asian American comedian. So this is a collection of letters to her daughters, which I didn't realize. I thought it was just like girls in general. Previous to reading this, I haven't watched any of her comedy specials. I wasn't sure what her angle is on comedy, which then I learned through this book. She is completely unapologetic. She has absolutely no shame about her body or talking about her body. It seems like nothing is taboo. Not her private parts or sex life, motherhood, like her experiences in motherhood, and the private details of her private parts during motherhood. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that she was very clearly a woman of her own, you know, very, very confident in what she was doing with her life and her body and just everything. So that aspect I really enjoyed. She just owns it, her life. So it was enjoyable, but I wasn't laughing with tears in my eyes. So I think ultimately maybe her comedy angle, her humor is not entirely for me. So if you've watched any of her skits or liked her shows, then I think you should 100% pick this book up. The next nonfiction I read is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty. So this is a Q&A with a real-life mortician. She lives, I think, in California somewhere, where she owns and runs a funeral home. This is a humorous approach on questions that she received from, I think it's kids, so real-life questions that somebody asked her about dead bodies. So every chapter is one question that she goes through. I think they were very well chosen, and some of these questions I even asked myself before, you know. She answers them in a way that really expresses her expertise in the subject, but with like a very funny spin, and she really lets her passion for her work shine through, and also the respect for, you know, these deceased people and their families. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I definitely will pick up Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. This is the other book by the author that is, I think, even more well known than this one. One of the interesting facts that stuck with me was actually, you know, like especially in Viking movies where the funeral that they do is they put someone in a boat, you know, they set the boat out to sea and then they shoot with fiery arrows at it, and this way the body gets cremated. It's not real. Then I read Art Matters by Neil Gaiman. These are short essays on creativity and artistry. I would recommend this very short work to anybody who's working on something even remotely creative. This is essentially advice that Neil Gaiman, a very accomplished author, gives to fellow artists, writers, any kind of artists, and this seems to me like just the words you need to hear if you're working on something and you're maybe losing focus, or you're not quite believing in yourself at this point. This seems like the motivational push that you need to hear if you're working on something. So it's very short. Pick this up if you feel like this sounds like something you need at this moment. That concludes all of my non-fiction reads for November. Now moving on to the few fiction reads I had. I read this year's new release, The Woman in the Library by Solari Gentile. This is a book within a book. The first layer of the book is just essentially a correspondence between an author and an acquaintance. And then the second layer of the book is basically the draft of a novel. And within that draft, you are in the Boston Public Library, and then suddenly a woman's completely terrifying, excruciating scream tears through the silence. And this is when 4 strangers that sit at the same table in this library are being brought together. It was intriguing to see how it will play out, you know, in both of the layers, and also to see like how is it that these 2 layers will kind of connect, or why are we looking at it from like these 2 different angles. What I didn't like very much is how chummy all of these characters got in a very, very fast manner. I know it's a short book, it's I think again under 300 pages, but it was just a bit too fast. It felt a bit unnatural. But what I did enjoy about this is the social commentary, and then also how self-conscious this book is. It's honestly quite meta. You'll see if you read it. I would still recommend it to anybody who likes the concept of a book in a book. I don't necessarily would call this a close circle mystery, but more of a cozy mystery. If you're into that, then I think you'll enjoy this book. Then I picked up Pearl by Josh Malerman. I had read Bird Box by Josh Malerman before, and then I came across Pearl in the library. I picked it up because of the cover, honestly, and because of the blurb. So the blurb doesn't give much away, and I think I'm gonna stick to it. So the summary says, you go to a farm and then you hear a voice in that farm, and that voice tells you to go and kill. What this is ultimately, I think, is a revenge story. It has crass language, a lot of axe wielding, because I told you it's quite the gory horror book. I do think that this should have been shorter. While it was, again, a book under, I think, 300 pages, it felt long in some ways. I think it would have been more effective as a short story or like a novella. But ultimately, I think it was a surprising, great horror book. And now I'm curious to know if the author is vegetarian. Then I picked up the very, very popular The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I've seen this book everywhere, so not gonna lie, I had higher expectations. So this takes place in a retirement village where a group of friends in that retirement village always meet up on a regular basis to discuss unsolved murders. One day, an actual murder happens within their community, so that brings out their amateur sleuth. All in all, the characters were all pretty likable, and I think there was a very interesting detective in there, but I don't think that it lived up to its hype. But again, maybe my expectations were just a bit too high. I am now contemplating if I should pick up book 2 or not, because I hear that it is much better. But you know, the first one was a 3 stars. It was for sure more leading towards cozy mystery. It just wasn't the perfect mystery for me. And then lastly, I read my first holiday book of the year. I read In Holidays by Christina Lauren with Patty Murin. So this is a holiday romance with a sci-fi element in it. Quite honestly, if this wasn't a holiday romance, I don't think it would have worked for me. But it did. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. Our protagonist is May. She's in her mid-20s and she's unhappy with her job, not really sure where she's going with her life. And every year her family drives out to a snowy Utah cabin that they share with other family friends, and they've been doing this for the longest time, since she was a little kid. So she's very close with the other kids, and amongst them are the brothers Andrew and Theo. So this does have the vibes of The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han, which I haven't read, but I just watched the show, so it's kind of the same concept, you know? It's like the girl with like 2 brothers, and she gets stuck in a time loop. For some reason, she starts reliving that time at the cabin again and again. You could say that the use of the time loops were a bit clumsy, but then again, because I wasn't expecting a super sophisticated sci-fi book, I was okay with it. And what I really focused on while reading this book or listening to it were really like the festive themes, like the cozy aspects of the book. And for me personally, I liked that the time travel aspect didn't have any high stakes. I didn't want that stress. I wanted a nice cozy holiday romance, and for that it actually worked. I mean, there's a bit of insta love in there. You have to be okay with that. It was just what I needed in that time to get me going into that holiday spirit. So yeah, 4 stars for me. So those were all the books that I read in November, and I am now going to start putting together my best of 2022 lists. I'm really excited for those. I'm excited to watch everybody's best of 2022 and also worst of 2022 lists. So I'm really looking forward to that. Let me know if you're uploading any videos like that, and I will for sure check them out. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to subscribe if you love bookish videos. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.